In 1967, something seismic happened in terms of popular music and culture, and that something was the Beatles' Sgt Pepper. Sgt Pepper was an important moment in popular music and said that it was no longer music of the moment, but instead it was something that was richly layered and textured, involving numerous boffins and their studio jiggery-pokery to produce this fine work of art. One that explores childhood, has a strange curiosity with the past, as well as dabbling into other strange milieus like music hall pastiche and vaudeville. Many people see Sgt Pepper as a kind of a fumbled concept album. Let's not forget the original concept was an exploration of their childhood and growing up in Liverpool, and the songs of Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields are very much of that ilk. And inspired, I think, by the Animals, who'd already done, a song or a couple of songs about their Newcastle, which was quite unusual at the time. But eventually they move away from that concept to explore the idea of an Edwardian marching band transported through time to the psychedelic age. I think it's a wonderful idea and explores the concept of the alter ego that would have perhaps even preceded Ziggy Stardust and albums like that. But nevertheless, it's a concept that kind of fizzles out, really. It almost as they just didn't have the legs or the ideas behind it. Interestingly, John Lennon said that he was aware of there being no concept regarding this album. It was just a collection of songs. And I've had others that have said they feel that this album's a little bit too dense, too layered, relying far too much on studio trickery, which is very much part of this album, really. But is it a great pop record, or is it merely a great feat of studio engineering? There's no doubt in my mind that there are moments in popular music where a line is drawn in the sand, where everything that comes afterwards is somehow fundamentally affected. Sgt Pepper is definitely one of those moments. I suppose one criticism you could aim at this record is that it's a little bit messy, almost as if it's not really sure what it wants to be. George Martin has said that he regretted not putting Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane on this album. If we reconfigure this record to include those two songs, my God, what sort of record would we end up with? But as I've said, I think Sgt Pepper feels a little bit busy, a little bit dense at times, even mawkish, where the White Album seems to be almost a breath of fresh air after all this colour and splodge. Now, don't get me wrong, the White Album is an uneven album, but it's now my love dearly, and I think its unevenness is very much part of its charm. But if we think about Sgt Pepper as a kind of a reconfigured album, what would this album have been had it included Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane? And of course those two songs were very much part of the Pepper sessions. There's no doubt in my mind that this is an important album. I don't think many of us would disagree with that statement. However, it's interesting, you look at these Beatles ranking videos, very rarely do I see Sgt Pepper included at the top of the list. So if we think about the songs on this album, we get the initial track which feeds into that Edwardian band concept, Sgt Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Nice, heavy, thumping track. Great opening statement. Then we get With a Little Help from My Friends, which I fundamentally enjoy. I think it's a little bit cheeky. And it gives Ringo his moment. Then we get Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which is this wonderful phantasmagoria of sound, where the Beatles take this Alice in Wonderland trip, which is all aided by that wonderful falling chromatic scale, which only adds to a sense of disorientation, swirling disorientation. Interesting as well that the voices are speeded up slightly to make the voices sound younger, childlike. It's a masterful work, I think, with that beautiful, eerie keyboard part at the start, played by Paul McCartney, by the way. So, as it is, I wouldn't touch a single hair on its rather lavish head. And Getting Better is a great number as well. That stabbing punchiness of it is needed, I think, after the kind of eerie psychedelia of Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds. And I also like the fact that McCartney's bludgeoning optimism is somewhat tempered a little bit by Lennon's It Couldn't Get Much Worse. Fixing a Hole, I love the guitar motif on this one. There were some people who insisted that it was a reference to drugs. I think it's a kind of a metaphor for McCartney wanting to get his life in order. She's Leaving Home is a fascinating number because it employs that Aeolian folk mode. Now, McCartney grew up in Liverpool. Of course, he would have been aware of all that sort of folk music and sea shanties and things like that. and this employs that, which is to devastating effect, especially as it uses polyphony, different voices, to tell the story of this girl that's run away from home. It very much is a nod to the kitchen sink dramas that were very popular in the late 60s. So nothing jettisoned there so far, being for the benefit of Mr. Kite. Now, I did a video yesterday, the Beatles' worst song, something I dashed off rather quickly, but somebody in the comments have said that this song should be on that list. But I would disagree. Not only is it a fantastic feat of studio engineering, it fits beautifully on this album as it links into that theme of the past, that sense of faded Victoriana. So I would definitely think that deserves to stay there. Then we get Within You, Without You, as a song that I would jettison. Don't get me wrong, this is a fascinating delving into world music, which was pretty embryonic in terms of mainstream artists at the time, and contributes to the reputation of this album being considered a game changer. An interesting variation of an Indian raga, which is fascinating at the time. However, the sitar, of course, had been used by the Kinks and by the Rolling Stones before this record. They'd used this instrument just to give their song a little bit of an Eastern flavour. It wasn't full-on world music in the same way that this track is. Then we get When I'm 64, which is a wonderful bit of musical pastiche and has oodles of charm, and I certainly wouldn't exclude that one. It was one of the first songs written for this record, as well as Strawberry Fields and Penny Lane, a song dedicated to McCartney's father. And then we get Lovely Rita, which was a bit of an unconventional love song. I love the piano. I think it's piano. Do correct me if I'm wrong. But with Sgt Pepper, often they would use 2 or 3 pianos and overdub them. Penny Lane, I think, uses about 4 pianos on that. But with Lovely Rita, we get this piano bit at the start, and this the voice that comes in. It has this great, almost ethereal, otherworldly quality that's a little bit reminiscent of the bridge section in Day in the Life, before it transmogrifies into this very domestic profession of love. McCartney said that I should hate her, but I decided it'd be better if I loved her instead. Then we get Good Morning, John Lennon's Pay Into the Day, the song inspired by Kellogg's cornflakes advert. I think this is one of the weakest songs on this album, and I would exclude this one and Within You, Without You. So there's your answer. They're the 2 songs I would take off this record. Then we get the Sgt Pepper Reprise, that track that anchors it to the start of the album. And of course we get the glorious Day in the Life, which is actually the merging of 2 songs, the melding of 2 songs. That's where the real ingenuity with this number is the bringing together of those 2 pieces, which ends on that crescendo and that thrum at the end, that piano, which is actually again about 4 or 5 pianos played at the same time and just goes on forever. So there you are. That's how I would change that album. I would take off Within, Without You and Good Morning, and put on Penny Lane and Strawberry Fields. So what do you think? Please leave your comments down below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this matter. So I'll leave you with my closing salvo, which is, hope you're well, staying safe, but more importantly that you keep listening.